But I just want to confirm before I call this meeting to order that notice, council.
And Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
I just pulled it up and it is City Council Tuesday, September 22nd. So I don't know if it just wasn't refreshed, but it is available.
Oh, there it is right
And
there.
the Watch
now.
Live link is
Yep,
also
okay.
available.
Yep, now I'm seeing it. Great. All right, great. Then we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
thank you. Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Thompson,
Here.
Woodings,
Here.
all present.
Great, thanks. Next up on the agenda is item number 2, request for approval of the minutes from the work session and regular evening meeting of September 15th.
Madam Mayor, I move we approve the minutes of September 15th, both the work session and regular meeting.
Second.
Give a motion a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
The third item on the agenda is the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, having heard no such requests, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
before we go forward, I should note that last week I voted on a resolution that did include Jacobs. There were 2 resolutions that included the company that my husband works for. I voted on one of those and should not have because he does work on that contract. I just wanted to note for the record that I am abstaining from, and I'm trying to find the number, and I apologize. I thought I had it written down here. Resolution 38220 from last week, if that's possible, as a
Yes.
reconsideration.
Are you asking for reconsideration?
Yes, I'm asking if I could do that.
All right. Is there a motion to reconsider?
Madam Mayor, I move reconsideration of the consent agenda from September 15th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right. And now we will hear a new motion for the consent agenda from September 15th with the council president's stated abstentions on the 2 matters rather than just one.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, and if I'll just clarify that it's resolution 37720 and 38220.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move approval of the consent agenda of September 15th, 2020, with the council president's abstention noted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And now we have no ordinances or hearings because today's a daytime meeting and a strategic planning session. So instead, we will have staff present. Hello. We'll have staff present today on 3 different topics. And it looks like first, I don't know if we have Courtney Washburn who's walking up here or Steve Burgos, who is already here.
I warned Steve I was going to go first, and then he tried anyways. Hello, Mayor, council members. As the mayor just mentioned, we're here today to provide some updates on strategic initiatives. You should have received in your Friday council memo the spreadsheet covering what we believe is the exhausted list of strategic initiatives. As you may know, this is part of an ongoing process. So if you have questions, feedback, additions to that document, please work with Amanda and we'll make sure we address those. That will also be your last Excel spreadsheet. That is not the best way to manage and provide updated information about the strategic initiatives. And Amanda will follow up with each of you about the new system we're going to use moving forward. And with that, we have chosen the climate division, canals, pathways, and economic development to highlight today. And feel free to ask any questions or provide any feedback during these presentations. And then we can follow up later if something else comes to mind. Thanks.
Great. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council members, thanks for the time this afternoon. My name is Steve Burgos. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Boise, and I've got a few slides I want to walk through. I just wanted to provide an update on the formation of the Climate Action Division and give you an update on climate action work, and this is for information only. So we'll talk about overview of current activities, introduce you to the division, and give an overview of the roles and responsibilities that we're proposing. And just a quick look at the current state of climate work. A lot of our work that's been happening in the city over the last several years has really been organic to the different kind of focus areas that you see here. We've never really had an overarching climate approach. We knew that we have to make some progress on energy, for example. We know that our community is very interested in waste reduction. And so when we look at these categories, these are broadly the categories that we've associated with past sustainability work. And we've made good progress in these areas. Some of the examples you see here are the Boise's Energy Future Project, the Boise Transportation Action Plan. Boise Airport has made some great strides on energy efficiency and converting diesel equipment to all electric. So we've made some progress. But what we didn't have, or what we don't have, is an overarching kind of climate approach that ties all of these different disparate focus areas together. And I'm going to get to that here in a second on how we plan to do that. But just providing some examples of our current climate work and the progress that's being made. The Boise Energy Future, that was work that we finished last year with the goals you see there on the slide. We have very specific actions for electricity, and we're going to be working on a thermal energy plan this year in FY21, and performing a lot of financial analyses and business case evaluations on things like an all-electric building. Like, how do you analyze that to try to make sure that we're moving towards all electric? And so that work led to things like the path to 100% clean electricity for the community. So an example of where we're integrating some of these kind of grassroots projects into larger initiatives. Another one, the Water Renewal Utility Plan that you're all aware of. We used a triple bottom line approach in that project, where we try to integrate things like the social cost of carbon, integrate things like the benefits of a drought-proof water supply. If you recall, we had a climate change scenario within that plan. We talked about aligning it with the Boise's Energy Future. So the point is that we're making progress in certain areas, but in many ways they've been disparate and kind of happening organically and not tied to a broader plan, a broader climate action plan or approach. And then again, other things that we're working on, just to provide some updates on current initiatives, the beneficial electrification work. We just received word that we're going to have our 5 all-electric trash trucks funded through the VW settlement money. So that was good news we learned yesterday. We're moving towards all-electric building remodels like the police micro district, where we did an analysis that looked at, if we went all-electric versus natural gas on the HVAC system, what are the payback periods? Yes, all electric was more expensive up front, but it had a payback period of about 16 years. So we went forward with an all electric building so that when we become a 100% clean electricity city, that's going to be a carbon neutral building. And you can see other things that we're working on there regarding energy efficiency and system expansion of the geothermal. But as I mentioned, we wanted to have this broader climate action approach where we could start to tie these individual projects and individual initiatives together. And so working with the mayor's office, we came up with an idea to be very intentional about our climate work. And a way to do that is to have staff actually assigned and responsible for making this work happen and making sure that the work is being integrated across those different focus areas. So we've formed the city's first climate action division within Public Works, and I'll show you an org chart here in a second. The role of the Climate Action Division is to develop and frame climate action policies for you all, Mayor and Council, and certainly developing and implementing a climate action framework, and I'll talk about conceptually what that is. Specifically, this group will be leading initiatives associated with the carbon footprint and GHG reduction scenarios. They'll be looking at a lot of energy work. They'll be tracking and managing a lot of climate action metrics and data so that we'll be able to provide back to you all exactly how we're doing, the progress that we're making. And then there'll be other climate initiatives as we move forward that we'll be talking with you all that will come out of this climate action framework that I'm going to talk about. In addition, they'll be responsible for coordinating across all city departments and external stakeholders on the climate action implementation. You can see a list of things that they're going to be responsible for, making sure there's coordination across the organization. And importantly, the group will be comprised of 5 existing FTEs. We didn't have to create any positions to form the initial group. We do have some requests in the FY21 budget for example, an energy program manager. But as the group is formed today, it is formed of 5 existing folks that have been working somewhat on climate action work, but we've never kind of described it that way. Now there'll be a group working together on specific climate action initiatives. And so they'll be located within the Public Works Department. You can see we have 5 existing divisions: engineering, operations, environmental, the utilities administration, and then the facilities program management. We're going to add the 6th division, climate action, will be led by Steve Hubble. Steve he's currently our deputy environmental division manager, and he led our Boise Energy Future project and did an outstanding job. That was a pretty complicated project that led to a very substantial commitment from the city. And so he's been involved in this work for the last 4 or 5 years. And so it made sense to promote Steve to the climate action manager, and he'll be leading the group. And as I mentioned, the primary focus is going to be developing this climate action framework. And so where we have those disparate focus areas, we're going to try to have an umbrella climate action approach over all of these to start to tie these actions together. And our proposal on how we do this, and this is still forming, is that for each focus area, we want to have identified mitigation projects, adaptation projects, and resilience projects. And just a quick explanation: mitigation being where we know we have to stop certain behaviors, right? So greenhouse gas production, we'll have a greenhouse gas reduction goal that's mitigating the potential impacts or mitigating the potential contributions to climate change. Adaptation would be where we're trying to make sure that we can adjust to the changes we know are coming. So in the case of water renewal services, recycling used water is an adaptation. We know that drought conditions are going to increase. How do we adapt to that? And then finally, resiliency is the ability to rebound from a more extreme weather scenario. So we know that climate change is going to create more extreme, say, storm systems, more extreme flooding events. How do we create a community that's more resilient, that can bounce back from those types of events? So as we move forward with the framework, the key outcomes will be to continue this work that we're currently doing, but in that larger overarching framework, and starting to connect these different focus areas. Equity will be the foundation of the work. That's a little bit new for us. And we're working with Dignitas, the agency that's helping us on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, to help us make sure that we're framing our climate action work with equity as the foundation. We'll be engaging and promoting community action with an emphasis that this is not, as much as this is the city's work, we're going to need the community to be engaged in taking action as well. We can't do this as a quote unquote city government. So a huge part of our work will be engaging the community on climate action. And in the end, where we're headed is, just like in the Energy Future program, we didn't commit to a clean energy goal just to commit to a clean energy goal. It's about reducing carbon footprint. So in the end, we're going to be coming to Mayor and Council with our proposal on identifying a specific greenhouse gas reduction goal, and then actions for the community and city operations. So this new division will be in charge of all of this work. There's going to be a lot on their plate, but they are really excited about it. When we came up with the idea, and the folks who are included in the division, they're excited about the prospects of what's coming, and it's a challenge, but they're up for it and excited about the work.
Madam Mayor.
Yes,
Oh.
go ahead.
Perfect. Well, we're on questions anyway. So Steve, would you mind going back a slide? So if you look at the various categories across the top, these are all very important things, but it occurs to me, and I'm trying to remember, I don't have my old charts with me right now, but built environment is a tremendously big part of how we use energy today. So transportation is about 40%. Our built environment is about 40%, and about 80% of that is, if my memory is correct, is existing built environment and needing to retrofit or at least mitigate the impacts of it. That includes buildings, it includes existing other infrastructure, and I wonder how we're going to address those in this action framework.
Madam Mayor, Council President, great question. And maybe I'll go back to the Boise Energy Future as just an example. So when we set the path for 100% clean electricity, a big part of that work was going to be the 15% there. It's kind of hard to see a little bit, but on electricity efficiency. And so moving forward, our ability to impact the existing built environment is going to be critical to us making this goal. And so one of the things that we worked on in year one of the implementation of Boise's Energy Future, for example, was at the PUC, we worked to try to change how Idaho Power calculates energy efficiency, the benefits of energy efficiency programs. And we were able to change that such that now we believe there'll be more energy efficiency concepts that'll be viable for funding from Idaho Power. And so that's an example of how, to your point, the existing infrastructure is going to be such a huge part of this, that we're really focused on electricity efficiency first. That'll reduce the backside capital costs of renewables, but will also help us address the existing infrastructure. Another example would be where we're trying to get the mayor, one of the mayor's priorities was efficiency upgrades for vulnerable communities. Another example of existing infrastructure, existing homes where folks need help. Can we go out and make sure that they're aware of energy efficiency programs to take advantage of? And then on the transportation side, that's a really good point. An emphasis on electrification is one of our first steps, but frankly, it's a really vexing issue for most cities. To your point, about 40% of our carbon emissions are associated with just transportation network, whether it's single occupancy vehicles or buses or transit. And it's a really hard question. Part of this group's work is to start getting after it and figuring out how do we promote electrification of fleets? How do we promote EV readiness in Boise? So that's certainly top of mind, and appreciate the question. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. I guess what I'm wondering about is, given the size of those two sectors and what we need to address to actually get to zero, we're showing in that prior slide all of these across the top as if they're equal. And I'm wondering if, as we build this, if we want to at least consider looking at the ones that have an outsized effect. And I guess I think built environment is almost in all of these, but I'm wondering if we don't pull it out separately, if we'll be able to address the outside effect that both it and transportation have. So I get, not a criticism, just wondering, as we build this going forward, how do we look at prioritizing? How do we make sure that we're addressing those particular items that have the outsized effect on our success?
Madam Mayor, Council President, I don't take it as criticism at all. Part of the focus on the climate action framework and the scope of work that we're developing is to do exactly that, is to develop all of the different solutions that we think are on the table, and then start to do an ROI, return on investment, bang for the buck, whether it's carbon reduction or it's a financial analysis. We haven't landed on it yet, but our intent would be to come out of that project with a list of, say, the top 50 things that we think ought to get moving. Frankly, many of those are already moving because we have a sense for the ROI. but we want to have a much clearer kind of definition on where's the bang for the buck on our next climate action steps. So appreciate the feedback.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to piggyback on Council President Clegg's discussion point, what about new construction and how this figures into that, and the steps that builders would take in ensuring that we have the best use of energy and mitigate the waste of energy in new construction?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, I know down in PDS, Jason Blaze has been working hard on making sure that the code is written such that it's promoting hopefully the most current energy efficiency practices. It can be a challenge with the legislature, frankly, but we're trying to work hard on that, making sure that when new construction comes online, it's as efficient as possible. And I think in addition to just efficiency, there's obviously the energy efficiency side, but it's also density is a good thing for climate work, right? The denser you can have a downtown, or the denser you can have a community, the better that is for carbon emissions. And so that's another point of emphasis, just in how council is allowing development to happen is also an important part of climate mitigation.
Great, thank you, Steve.
Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Steve, one of the things we talked about when we were adopting Boise's energy future was the desire to also adopt a methane goal of some kind. Does that fit into this last bullet point, or where does that fit into the scope of this plan?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem, great point. It would fit into that last bullet point, but as in parallel to, and I don't know that I was very clear about this, in parallel to developing the framework, we're going to be working on that thermal energy plan.
Great.
So we'll be coming back to you in FY21. That was the direction from council back in 2019. Yes, 2019, to develop a thermal action plan sooner and set goals sooner. So we're going to do that in 21. So we'll be back in front of you with those.
Wonderful. Thank you for the update.
No problem.
Looks like you're good.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, council members, good afternoon. Zach Pietmeyer, transportation planner within comprehensive planning. I'm joined today by Tom Laws, also with comprehensive planning. We're here and excited to talk to you about the canal pathways, or pathways master plan. I'll start off giving you a brief overview of what the project is and some of the recent efforts we've gone through to date. I'll turn it over to Tom. He'll give you some more details about the nuts and bolts of the actual project. So what is it we're hoping to create with the master plan? The name itself could be subjective and interpreted differently, but what we've identified through preliminary discussions is we hope to create a citywide plan informed by stakeholders and technical analyses, which prioritizes and guides the implementation of an off-street pathway system. Why is that needed? Well, we've all come to learn that public streets and public rights of way managed by our partners at ACHD and ITD, those are critical to our overall mobility. But we believe there's an untapped potential for improved mobility through the off-street connective tissue in our cities, such as railroads, canals, and underdeveloped or undeveloped properties. By adding off-street pathways to our Movement for Everyone toolbox, we will be able to make quality of life improvements for a lot of folks in a way similar that the Greenbelt has for many people. Getting down to the plan itself, what it really functions as is it helps us understand what level of effort and cost will be required for the pathway system to be implemented. It will guide that expenditure of future capital improvements, but it really, most importantly, will be a communication tool, both to the companies that operate those facilities, irrigation facilities, or potentially railroad facilities, the underlying property owners, transportation agency partners that we'll have to work with, developers, obviously, and then a communication tool about priorities to the public. So leading up to today, PDS has been active in getting the project rolling. We've been developing a scope of work, which we hope to release in an RFQ here in the next couple of weeks, which really will define what efforts the in-house staff will conduct versus what we need an outside consultant to assist with. We've also put together some broad strokes at a schedule, and Tom will be going over both those items here in a minute. We've also been coordinating with other departments internally, specifically the Mayor's Office, Parks and Rec, and Public Works. And then as Council President Clegg and Councilmember Halliburton are aware of, we've been starting initial discussions with some outside advocacy groups that will ultimately become very important partners as we go forward. One example is the Canals Connect Communities Coalition. But beyond this legwork, staff all throughout the city has been engaged in recent and relevant project work that has really kind of laid the groundwork for this master planning effort. One of those important projects is the Goddard Linear Parkway shown here. The Goddard Linear Park is located within Settlers Irrigation District owned property near Capitol High School, just off Goddard, and immediately adjacent to the Settlers Irrigation Canal. Staff thus far has coordinated with the neighborhood via Energize to determine priorities for this currently inactive space. We've developed concept plans that include pathways among other amenities, and we've drafted and submitted the plan and potential agreement to Settlers Irrigation District for consideration. Should this project go forward, it will help improve connectivity, obviously, to Capitol High School, which is great, but it has the potential to really activate some land in the West Bench neighborhood that was otherwise unused and vacant, sometimes resulting in a dumping ground for trash. Another project that recently was completed by ACHD, which the city partnered in, was the McMillan Westview to Maple Grove project. ACHD constructed a multi-use pathway shown here along the north side of McMillan, which is along the southern edge of the Hyatt Wetlands Hidden Lakes Reserve and other city-owned property. The pathway, as I said before, runs adjacent to and parallel to city property where the Settlers Irrigation Canal is also located, same canal as the previous project. And again, once this project, or now that this project is completed, improves connectivity to Hyatt as well as other important West Valley destinations and has the potential to activate previously unused and vacant land. Another project that the city is actively engaged in is the Cascia Garden Connection. Through the Neighborhood Investment Program, the city is currently working to implement a pathway through unopened ACHD right-of-way adjacent to the electric light switch lateral, which is a Nampa Meridian Irrigation District facility, connecting Albion and Garden Street to the Cascia Park. The project has been in various stages of development over several decades, almost 50 years now, and represents a huge potential for improved connectivity for the Central Bench, linking not only just Cascia Park, but another major city park, a city pool, and 5 schools with the Greenbelt, and a host of commercial and other destinations along in the Central Bench area. And lastly, before I turn it over to Tom, one effort that we've been engaged in with other municipalities throughout both Ada and Canyon counties is the Compass Regional Rail with Trail effort. Compass has led this, and a preliminary plan has been developed along the existing rail corridor to establish multi-use pathway in the corridor. The plan identifies both in and out of corridor network connections, pathway alignments, trailhead locations. It identifies location-specific street crossing treatments, pathway cross-sections, and even includes estimates for cost to complete. We believe that this portion of the plan that has already been created can easily be incorporated directly into the city's future master plan, so an easy add on there. And I'll turn it over to Tom to talk about the specific scope of this project.
Thank you, Zach, Madam Mayor and Council. Next up, I'm going to kind of go through the vision that we have for the plan itself. And we've really divided this up into 5 different phases, and I'll go through those next. But I will note that this is really subject to change. So we're planning for the RFP, as Zach mentioned, to go out shortly. And with that, we'll really be relying on the consultant to provide, what their vision is for the plan as well. But, today we're really at this phase 1, which is the formation side. We envision teaming up with a consultant to look at the background research, listening, and synthesis phases. And these 3, we really relied on the Ridge to Rivers around the next turn 10-year plan as a template. We felt that was a really great recent plan that had good public involvement and really clear implementation steps. And so that was kind of the guiding scope to these 3 phases. And then finally, with the last phase, administrative, that would be the adoption into Blueprint Boise. So what do these phases look like? The first one with formation, that's really the general creation of the scope and the RFP, selecting the consultant, and then bringing on both an internal staff team, which I think really exemplifies one city, one team, where this group will be made up of representatives from Public Works, from Parks and Rec, from Community Engagement, from the Mayor's Office, and of course PDS. And then in addition, we'll have an external planning work group as well. And we envision this to be made up of several individuals, including other jurisdictions such as ACHD and those transportation partners, but then also nonprofit subject matter experts, such as the Canals Connect Communities Coalition. Really, the goal of this phase is to get the consultant on board as soon as possible and then develop those team rosters. And that timeline is going to be taking place between now and November, with really the bulk of that being the RFP process going out, allowing consultants to apply, and then that review period to choose the consultant we would like. For phase 2 that we're calling background research, this is really to dive in and review previous planning efforts. And I will note that the City of Boise has a similar pathways plan called the Boise Bikeways Plan that was completed in 1975, and it's this black and white document up here. In addition, we also have a 1995 micropaths document that we'll be relying on. You know, a lot of the pathways that we'll be looking at, we're not recreating the wheel. These are things that we've heard from our residents for decades. So I think that relying on these previous planning efforts will get us a lot of that previous research up to speed now, so we aren't starting fresh.
Madam Mayor, can I ask you a quick question, Tom? How difficult is it to take these previous plans and previous documents and dump them into GIS and kind of like see where they are?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem, so I'll jump ahead really quick.
Sorry.
But here's a perfect example. So this is that 1976 plan. And so fortunately with it came up with this really clean map as well. So in this case, it'll be pretty quickly just to draw those lines into GIS. Other plans are almost entirely text, which was really the theme in the 70s and 80s. So those will definitely take a little more time when we're trying to figure out exactly what those alignments look like. So in addition to our existing plans, we'll also be relying on research that other jurisdictions and other peer cities have completed. So this can include, for example, the Meridian Pathways Master Plan, and then also ACHD neighborhood planning documents and the Roadways to Bikeways Plan. The goal with this phase is really 3 main deliverables. The first being, review those previous plans, as I'd mentioned, identify those best practices, both within the city, within the Treasure Valley in Idaho, but then also nationwide. What are those jurisdictions that have had success in similar pathway efforts? And then one other thing we want to do is a City of Boise, what we're calling a policy analysis. So look into both our zoning ordinance and then Blueprint Boise to identify what language do we have in there that really helps support pathway systems, pathway building, and that network. And I think I'm really excited about this one because the recommendations that come out of this in regards to the zoning ordinance will be able to tie directly into the zoning ordinance rewrite. In this phase, we're really looking at jumping off in November and likely ending somewhere in January, February. We have a little extra time factored in with this phase, largely because of the holiday season with Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. The third phase, listening, is really going to be the bulk of our public engagement and public outreach. And so that's going to be made up of a variety of things, individual stakeholder outreach with neighborhood associations, with the irrigation districts, and our fellow jurisdictions. We also plan on having an open house and online survey here, which is really aimed at getting the public priorities and the public vision for what is a true citywide pathway network. What could that look like? What are their priorities and where? The two deliverables coming out of this being that first open house and survey, what those results look like, but then also a summary of the public desires. And we anticipate this largely happening next spring. From the results that we hear from the public engagement, that will lead directly into phase 4, which is the synthesis phase. And really that's taking all that feedback we heard, what are those desires, what's the vision and goals of this pathway network, and one, evaluating and creating a prioritization criteria. So, we're going to have a list of 100 potential segments, and we need an easy way to identify which one of those should be prioritized first. So we have clear implementation steps moving forward. And this is just an example figure of what that could look like, where we look at things like, what is the underlying property ownership? Is it public right-of-way and ACHD or the irrigation district owned, or is it 50 different backyards of individual property owners? In regards to connectivity, is it connecting directly to the regional network, let's say the Greenbelt, or is it activity centers, parks, schools, grocery stores, and so forth? And then also considerations with both irrigation district requirements. Do we have to separate the pathway from the irrigation district maintenance road? Are we going to need to pipe the canal or lateral and so forth? And that really ties into the cost considerations as well. So with this prioritization and analysis of the different pathway alignments and segments, we'll be creating mapping, different cross sections and alignments, looking at that cost estimate, as I mentioned, and then also diving in a little bit into legal framework. So what are the state statutes, the city statutes in regards to things like recreational immunity or trespassing and so forth. And really coming out of this phase, we see the draft plan itself, another public outreach opportunity diving into, and open house diving into that draft plan, taking what we heard in phase 3 and bringing it back to the public and saying, did we get this right? Is this really, is this what your intentions were? And then after that, tying this all up into the final plan. And in this phase, we anticipate starting in spring and then wrapping up in the summer. And then finally, with the administrative side, the objectives and deliverables here are really the same. And that's once we have that final plan document, let's get it adopted into Blueprint Boise and make it official with the city. And that largely is going to be through the end of the fiscal year and slightly into the fall, winter of 2021, going through the planning and zoning and then city council process. And so just to review kind of what we're envisioning, and once again, this may change depending on which consultant we select, is really those 5 different phases. The formation starting now, the background research starting at the latest in November with the consultant on board, listening in the spring, as well as the synthesis, going through spring and summer, and then wrapping up with the administrative side next fall. And with that concludes our presentation. And so Zach and I will stand for any questions you might have.
Madam Mayor.
Just a second. First, we'll have Councilman Halliburton and then Councilmember Sanchez.
First of all, I just wanted to say thanks for all the work with this. Council President Clegg and I have had the opportunity to work with you a little bit more and see how much you've been pouring in. So it's really appreciative. And I'm glad that you're excited about the City of Boise policy analysis side of things. I think that that's something that I'm excited about as well. And I want to say thank you again for, before that's formed, the work that you've done and the work that PDS has done in trying to be proactive. And even before there's a policy, what are the different types of things that we can be protecting in the form of easements and stuff. And so that's been really helpful for me, that learning process. And if there's other things like that in the meantime, before we get to that policy analysis, please let me know so that we can begin, chipping away on those things. But thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Madam
Oh, you look
Thank
frozen.
you. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Okay.
Oh no, am I frozen?
Nope,
Okay.
you aren't now, but
Can you
there
hear
is a
me?
delay.
Okay. So one of the tools of Facebook that I sometimes appreciate is the memory function that lets you know what you were doing on a particular day, a year ago, 5 years ago, that sort of thing. And so yesterday, apparently 6 years ago yesterday, I made a post about my harrowing experience riding my Idaho Youth Ranch cruiser. And it was just really funny, and just a funny reminder of like, oh, that's right, I used to be brave and I used to ride my bike. But I think this particular experience where I had angry drivers yelling at me, another pedestrian and I were waiting to cross the road and the cars wouldn't stop. And I was so upset by this because I was trying to do the right thing. And I made a post about it, and I even mentioned BBP and now Councilmember Halliburton. And so I'm wondering if any of those plans, when they reached out to the community, or our plans now to reach out to the community for input, will it include people like me, people who currently do not use their bicycles for transportation or even recreation, just to get some input from folks about what it would take, what would it need to look like for them to embrace this as an alternative form of transportation?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez. I think maybe two things come to mind first. The one is being, when we analyze these different pathways, I think there's going to be different functions that will rise above. So for example, we might have some that are going to be further out in, let's say, the Southwest that don't really have major activity centers on either side, which could be more towards recreational based. And so, you know, that might be for those riders that are concerned about the day-to-day commuting, but then still have opportunity to use some of these pathways for more of that recreational side. But then we'll also identify those ones that really do a good job connecting schools to neighborhoods, to parks and so forth, which I think could be, you know, tying in a little bit with that commuting side and the transportation. But I think to your point, it's going to be critical that we make sure that as many different viewpoints are involved from the start as possible. I think the last time I counted, we have about 14 different public engagement or city council engagement opportunities throughout this process, and making sure that we get those, you know, concerned citizens that you know, aren't 100% comfortable riding a bike, but then on the other extreme, making sure we hear those voices of people that might not have a car and are forced to be biking, you know, every day, regardless of the weather, is going to be really key with this planning process.
Thank you, Tom. And like I said, I really appreciate that reminder function, because as I read my post, the reason I was riding that bike was my 17-year-old car was not working. And so I had to be brave and use my bike, which was not something that I did at that time or even now. So I really appreciate the fact that there will be some outreach to folks like myself who are not quite comfortable using that alternative form of transportation. I'm also wondering, at any of these, at the ends of any of these new pathways, are there any large employers where folks might be commuting to?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, absolutely. I think, you know, really one of the unique things about a lot of these canals, the majority really are that they come directly from and off of the Greenbelt. So I almost view it as, you know, a circulatory system where we're going to have these offshoots that are going to be able to get people to the Greenbelt and then get them, you know, let's say directly to downtown. But, you know, there's already a few that we've identified that will link up directly to activity centers and main areas of employment as well. The main one that's coming to mind now is the Farmers Lateral, which travels right below the second bench behind Bishop Kelly, Bora High School, and then pops out at the Hillcrest Shopping Center, which you have the Albertsons there. You have, you know, one of our library branches, you have a couple gyms, a bakery, and so forth. So I think, you know, that could be one, the employment opportunity, that employment connection, but then also, you know, tying into those critical services that we need as neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Well,
Madam Mayor.
Sure, just a second. I just wanted to follow up on that too. I mean, thinking about mobility in different ways is really important. And so I see these as pathways for bikes, but just as importantly, as open space for people. Just as 50 years ago when we started to map out the Greenbelt plan and we looked at where it could go, how it could go, what the ownership was, and and started imagining what it would look like. And it's taken us, those 50 years to fulfill the vision. This should do the same as we reimagine what open spaces look like for our residents. Looking at canals, if we can make some of this work, creates incredible opportunity to provide open spaces for people to be in, to be out and enjoying, to be walking, to getting to different places. But to be able to have those spaces throughout the city is incredibly valuable. And a network of canals could provide that if we can find willing partnership.
Madam Mayor.
Sure.
Thank you. Well stated. I was going to bring up the open space issue as well. It's interesting to hear so much talk about policy and exciting to hear other people who are excited about policy. Thank you, Tom, for being so excited about that, and Councilmember Halliburton as well. One of the things that I wonder as we do this is tying back to the work that's already gone into the Transportation Action Plan and ensuring, and I know you're going to do this, I just want to restate it to ensure that the public knows this, that ensuring that whatever connections we get on these canals, be it recreational, open space, or transportation related, or all three, as the case may be, that they'll also be connected to the on-street bicycle and pedestrian systems, so that in fact they do provide ways for people to get around town, or ways for them to get from their residence to a destination, or from a destination to some open space, or whatever it may be. Am I correct on that, Tom?
Madam Mayor, Council President, absolutely. And I think I didn't emphasize it enough when I mentioned our really relying on ACHD to come to the table and help us. There's a few examples of canal pathways in particular where it's almost every quarter mile they'll be crossing a roadway. And so it's key that we'll have that partnership and be working with them from the start to identify not only those connections to the on-street network, but then also how do we transition across the on-street network to make sure that these segments aren't one-offs and really connect to that broader picture.
Great, thank you. One other question as we talk about partners. I know you mentioned Compass in relation to the Rail with Trail plan that they're producing, jointly, especially with Meridian and the City of Boise. I wonder what role you envision them playing in terms of helping whatever consultant or city staff develop some of the research around both demand and the mapping that we'll need to do. Are we going to ask them to play a role as part of our membership?
Madam Mayor, Council President, I think everything's on the table at this point. Your comment on data collection reminds me that Compass does have quite a few automatic bike and ped counters. So it might be really interesting if we identify a few key segments early on. Do we go ahead and get counters out there now and try to get that before and after, or even during? But to your point, I think we really can rely on them but then also our other cities throughout the Treasure Valley on, identification of those best practices throughout the valley, but then also, identifying where are examples that have really worked well, both with working with the irrigation districts, but then also, potentially, let's say, new development. We have great examples in Meridian and Eagle and Caldwell and so forth, and I think bringing both them in as partners, those jurisdictions, but then also Compass will be really helpful to keep the regional picture in mind.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Just a few comments. First of all, thank you to both of you. This is outstanding work and it's very exciting. And I appreciate the attention that's been brought to it by, several of the council members, especially Councilmember Halliburton's passion for opening up canal ways. I know that's important to you, and that would be very exciting to see across the city. I just wanted to second what the mayor noted. To me, it's that open space as well. I may not, excuse me, ride my bike as often because I like to walk because I have my dogs with me. And so walking along a canal pathway is just another way to enjoy that open space with my dogs and daughter and that sort of thing. So it certainly opens it up for transportation, but I just think it adds potentially an enormous new amenity to our city in that regard. So, thanks.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. More to come. Really look forward to working on this.
Thank you.
And next up, looks like we've got Sean.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to be able to present on a couple of items that we have happening in economic development in the mayor's office right now. Today, I'm going to highlight our work on the Economic Recovery Task Force and as well as the Economic Development Strategic Plan. So I'll kick it off with the work we've been doing on the Economic Recovery Task Force. This is an effort that has been underway since about mid-May of this year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, and as a way to convene a group of community leaders to address some of the specific challenges that we've experienced as a community as part of this pandemic, but also to address the longer-term implications of the profound effect that this has had on our community and our economy. So looking at this from both a response standpoint, but also an opportunity to build something out of this sort of game-changing event that we've had with the pandemic. And as part of that, to develop a set of priorities in the short, mid, and long term that would enhance economic resilience and agility for the city in the years to come. It was also an opportunity to strengthen the relationships that we have with our partners, specifically those on the task force, but also the broader partners that are part of our community here and will be ultimately part of the recovery effort, and as well as just strengthening the relationships of the city with the public, those who are directly going to see the results of the efforts that we have toward economic recovery as part of this task force effort. And so, in summary, it's basically it was to develop a focus on a clear course of action toward specific strategic priorities and identify resources to make those actions happen. So a little bit about the task force itself and who it was composed by. So we had, as mentioned, community leaders that were broadly representative of the economic community here in Boise. 12 members in total, along with the mayor, and it was supported by city staff and a third-party facilitator. The representation came from all sectors of the economy, public, private, and nonprofit. You'll notice that, we kept the group small. We had a short focused effort here, and the goal was to develop a high level vision in that short period of time that would be the first step in a much broader effort, that being the Economic Development Strategic Plan that I'll talk about here in a few minutes. But as you can see, this is sort of the broad representation that I'm talking about. Major employers, energy and climate, built environment. I won't read through the whole list, but the effort here, of course, was to create something that was, again, broadly representative of the community. In terms of process, this was an effort that lasted approximately 10 weeks of active engagement. I'll emphasize, too, that this task force will be engaged with the city for a much longer period of time, and the task force members have committed to that. But the active engagement piece was about 10 weeks, and that was again beginning in about mid-May and lasting through mid-August. We had a third-party facilitator from Neutral Ground, the Boise Valley Economic Partnership, one of our trusted partners with whom we work quite frequently. And that the facilitator was Charity Nelson, who's the Director of Economic Development there. And we're also lucky to have the support of the mayor and, of course, city staff. This was an iterative process. So we began this process very broad brush with an effort to solicit big ideas and values from the group and eventually get to a set of strategic priorities that we could then work toward specific actions that we could take over the short, mid, and long term, which we defined as short term being 0 to 3 months, midterm 3 to 6, and then long term being 6 months to a year and maybe more than that. As we worked through this process with the task force, we developed a set of guiding principles. And these guiding principles were the values that underlaid every piece of the work that we did, those being opportunity, partnerships, innovation, and adaptation. And these are guiding principles that are important to all the work that we do in economic development at the city, but that are particularly important in light of the pandemic and the unique conditions we're facing right now. And as we moved through the process with these principles to guide us, we developed strategic priorities and then eventually action areas that fell into 3 broad categories of public health, populations that who have become increasingly vulnerable. So these are not just existing vulnerable populations, but populations, folks who, because of the pandemic, have faced increasingly vulnerable circumstances. And then finally, employment and workforce, which is, of course, an ongoing priority for economic development efforts here in Boise. Finally, we just wanted to make sure as well, and we heard this from the task force, that all the priorities that we had were aligned with the community priorities that were identified in the Economic Opportunity for All transition report. And this is way too small to put up on screen, but just as an overview of how we organized the priorities in the document, without having it here to show you, essentially we organized the priorities in terms of action areas, strategic areas, and then short, medium, long-term action timeframes. As far as next steps, the public release of the task force recommendations, if it hasn't happened already, is happening imminently, so it will happen today. Again, the actions that have been identified in the document will be carried out by the city and the task force and or other members of the community, business community, nonprofit community, et cetera, in Boise, as identified in the plan. And it will be a first step to the broader set of actions that we'll take in the economic development strategic plan effort, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So I'm happy to pause now and take any questions on this particular effort, or just move directly on to the next subject, whichever you prefer. Okay, thank you, Mayor and council members. I'll keep moving.
Oh, wait, I saw Council President unmuted. Did you have something, Elaine?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, I guess, as you do go forward into the economic strategic plan, at some point it'd be good to have a discussion about how we carry forward the task force recommendations. I suspect, given the depth of this recession and some of the impacts of the COVID crisis, that some of these will end up being quite long-term. So I just want to make sure that we have a chance at some point to go through them and identify those. I don't think today's that day.
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, very much agreed, and I'm happy to work collaboratively with you and the mayor and the rest of the council to help identify these actions that are particular priorities moving forward in the long term, as you suggest. Okay, without any further questions on the task force, we'll move on to the Economic Development Strategic Plan. So the Economic Development Strategic Plan is a, would you like me to pause here.
Oh, no, you're good, Sean.
Okay, all right. The strategic plan is an effort that we are kicking off as we speak. So as we put the task force recommendations out to the public and move on from that engagement effort, we're literally kicking off this longer term effort probably this week. And the intent here is to develop a plan that will define the city's long-term priorities around economic development, its goals and strategies, and tactics, and along with those, the metrics that will help us measure our success over time, and take a build, measure, and learn approach. So as we build, we measure our success, learn from that, and then have a strategy in place to look back and see how we've done over time to improve. We've identified some general focus areas in the RFP. So just for context, we've developed the RFP that is being put out to the public this week for responses from interested parties. We hope to receive those solicitations within the timeframe that our purchasing department has identified, which I believe is 2 to 3 weeks, and then have a consultant on board within the next month or so. So as part of that RFP and the scope that we've developed, we identified some general focus areas that could change as part of the consultant's input, but generally business attraction and target industry improvement, recruitment, business retention and expansion, workforce and industry partnerships, entrepreneurship and small business support, stakeholder and partner alignment, and then finally those metrics and performance measures that will help us understand our progress over time. So as part of that project scope, the key action areas that we anticipate to occur will be first a broadly representative engagement of a group of community stakeholders as part of this plan. So as mentioned, the task force was the first step in that. This is the next step and next several steps as part of that process, and we anticipate this engagement to be broader in terms of the groups that we'll engage and the time frame of that effort. Second, we'll have a focus on data, and this being, for example, economic baseline metrics that will help to support the strategic goals that we'll identify as part of this process. So that next step being identifying the strategic goals from a high level, and then from there creating an implementation and action plan that will identify specific actions and projects to take. And then finally, as mentioned before, the development of tools to monitor and measure our progress, and to be able to report as we move along, especially to this council, our progress along the lines of our economic development priorities.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Sean, can you go back to that slide you were just talking about? So this broadly representative group of community stakeholders, can you give us some examples of some of those stakeholders that represent that diverse grouping?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, certainly. So we've identified some draft areas of focus in our RFP, but we'll certainly look to the consultant to ensure that we have this a list that's as comprehensive as it can be. I'd anticipate it to be, for example, small businesses, arts organizations, nonprofits, community chambers, broadly representative community chambers. Yeah, I think a full spectrum, I mean, large employers. We'll have a finalized list when we review the scope with the consultant and work with our internal staff. But yes, I anticipate it to be a broadly representative group.
That's great. Can we ensure that those small business owners that we make sure that folks who perhaps English may not be their first language, that they are included in this representation as well?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, certainly we certainly anticipate doing that, and I'd be happy to follow up with you on those efforts and ensure that we're reaching all the groups that we should be.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. So as part of the final deliverable of this plan, we anticipate it to be something that's concise, graphically rich, and directive. So to clearly define the steps, the projects, the actions that we'll take. But all this will include a documentation of the work that we've done. So the community outreach, the data and analysis, and the work that went into creating the strategic goals, tactics, outcomes, et cetera, as part of that. So it will have, as far as a public-facing document, something I would anticipate around 20 pages, and then an appendix to back that up with all of the work that went into completing the plan. As far as next steps, we anticipate this RFP, the request for proposals, to go out this week from our purchasing department. Anticipate about 4 weeks for a collection of the responses and review of those. Shortly thereafter, we hope to engage a consultant and get the project rolling, and then foresee something along the lines of a 6-month timeline. These are all estimates, but anyway, I think best guesses. With that, I'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Sean. It's great to get an update. Quick question about the potential focus areas you listed. Not surprisingly, I'm going to talk about infrastructure. And it does seem like when we do economic development plans, we focus on the human infrastructure and the company infrastructure, if you will, but we don't focus on the built infrastructure. And I wonder if there's a role to review what infrastructure we do have in place that will serve whatever industries or other businesses that we identify we need, and ensure that we have enough capacity, ensure that we're marketing it in the right way, those kinds of things.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg. Yes, thank you. We anticipate to complete a baseline economic assessment at the beginning of this process, as well as a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities analysis that will identify some of those areas of need that we'll need to stress during this plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like that might be it.
Madam Mayor, I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Thank you so much, Sean. I know that you've been working really hard to help people adapt and help companies adapt throughout all of this. So I know that this is going to be something that lets you get out of the weeds a little bit and look at something a little bit longer term. I don't really have any questions, but I'm just hopeful that this gives us a really good picture of where we need to go economically, so that we can make sure that people have great jobs and that they are able to live in our community with those jobs. And so I look forward to going through the process with you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean, for your presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council.
All right. We went through things a little bit more quickly than we expected today. Those are the 3 items we had, and it looks as though we have no other business to come before the council.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
We have a motion, and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Bye, guys.